film begins with our protagonist, Emily, who is a benevolent social worker. She dedicates her entire life to ensuring that children do not have to grow up in abusive homes. One day, her colleague, Wayne, hands her a case of alleged child abandonment involving a girl named Lilith Sullivan. She investigates and sees the girl's photo inside the file, before heading home at the end of the day to prepare for a date with Douglas, who is also a co-worker. Douglas is charming and kind, and it's clear that the two are in love with each other. However, their jobs are very time-consuming, so they decide not to enter into a relationship immediately. Later that night, Emily spends time studying Case 39, which is none other than Lilith Sullivan's case, and this situation intrigues her. The next morning, she goes straight to the Sullivan household, where she is coldly received by Lilith's mother. She asks for a meeting with the whole family, and it becomes clear that something must be going on, as the father simply refuses to say a word to Emily. They end up in a staring contest for most of the time, and the mother insists that they have no family problems. When Emily returns to the office that day, she tells Wayne that she is convinced that Lilith must be being abused because something really seems off about the parents. Therefore, she convinces Wayne to let her invite the family to the office. When the family arrives, for some reason the father begins to speak eloquently. He tries to convince Emily and Wayne that nothing is wrong with the family. Regardless of what the father said, Emily is still convinced that something is happening. She eventually finds Lilith and finally manages to speak with the girl alone. After some persuasion, Lilith finally admits what is wrong with her parents. She also begins to admit that her parents would like to send her to hell, whatever that means. Upon hearing this, Emily becomes even more worried. She takes Lilith to Wayne and asks the little girl to make an official statement admitting what her parents have done to her, but Lilith remains silent this time. Without any concrete evidence of abuse, Wayne tells Emily to let the case go. But of course, this does not deter Emily. She goes to see her police friend Mike, and he tells her that he can't do anything until she brings him some solid evidence of child abuse. Determined to keep Lilith safe, Emily finds her after school and gives her her number. That same night, while Emily relaxes alone in her living room, she receives a call from Lilith, who is distressed, saying she is scared because her parents are about to hurt her and that she is very sorry, as she can't stay awake any longer. This leads Emily to leave her house and drive straight to the Sullivan residence. She also calls Mike, the police officer, on the way and begs him to come to the scene as well. At the Sullivan residence, Lilith's parents carry the sleeping girl into the kitchen and proceed to place her inside the oven. She struggles against her evil parents in vain, and they manage to put Lilith back in the oven this time. At the same time, Emily and Mike arrive on the scene and force their way in upon hearing Lilith's screams. Emily finally finds Lilith and frees her, with Mike following. In the next moment, he confronts the father while the mother advances with a knife towards Emily, ready to attack. Fortunately, Mike manages to stop the mother. Due to this incident, the court sends Lilith's parents to a mental institution for psychological evaluation, while Lilith will be placed in a shelter until they find a foster family for her. However, as soon as Emily takes her to the shelter, Lilith says she doesn't want to stay there and wishes to live with Emily because Emily is a caring person. Emily, with a heavy heart, initially says no, as this would cause a conflict of interest in her work, but ultimately gives in because she feels emotionally attached to the child. She then convinces the board to let Lilith stay with her, and manages to do so. After that, Emily returns to see Lilith and tell the girl that there is good news for them. In the next scene, Emily visits Lilith's old home to pick up some things. There she discovers scratch marks on the floor and several locks on the parents' bedroom door. This indicates that, for some reason, Lilith's parents would lock themselves in their room every night. Emily then leaves for work and watches Lilith participate in group therapy for children from troubled homes. Here, we see a boy named Diego share how he is bullied at school because his parents have marital problems. The next day, Emily is called by Wayne, who somberly informs her that Diego murdered his parents the night before. Emily then rushes to the crime scene and witnesses bloodstains on the bed. Mike, the police officer, is also there. He tells her something strange about how Diego was climbing the walls, and it took 3 men to subdue him. Emily cannot believe what she hears, thinking there was no way a 10-year-old boy could do this. This incident profoundly shakes Emily, but fortunately, Douglas is there to comfort her. When Emily returns home later, she discovers that Lilith has gone through her family photos. This leads Emily to share about her past, Her mother died when she was young due to a car accident. The next day, Emily has lunch with Mike, the police officer. Here, Mike informs her that moments before Diego murdered his parents, the boy received a call that suspiciously came from Emily's house. This confuses Emily because she swears she never called Diego's house that night. The two then go to Emily's house to interrogate Lilith, but the girl insists she never called Diego that night. Before Mike leaves that night, he tells Emily that he is convinced that Lilith was lying. Curious, the next day, Emily decides to see Diego and asks him if Lilith called him that night, but he begins to hyperventilate. Diego is taken to a hospital, and Emily tries to ask him again. This time, Diego finally speaks. In Spanish, he tells Emily that it was a man's voice that called him that night. Emily spends the rest of the day thinking about the information she just learned and how a man's voice could have come from her house. Lilith is in the office with her, until Douglas takes her with him to assess her progress as a previously abused child. Alone with Douglas, he questions her about the questionnaire she just filled out. Apparently, Lilith answered no to all the questions about fears. Douglas then tells her that this cannot be true and tries to ask what her biggest fear is. The girl promises him that she will only tell him her biggest fear if he tells her his. It turns out Douglas is afraid of wasps. It is at this moment that Lilith begins to act strangely, saying that she is only afraid of herself because she has bad thoughts about certain people, including Douglas. She then warns him, saying he should be afraid of what is to come. Douglas seems shaken after the session and goes to tell Emily that he never feels threatened when talking to children. During dinner with Lilith that night, we can see that Emily starts to suspect the child. That same night, Douglas's landline rings, and he goes to answer it just when he hears a strange sound from the call. He then starts hearing buzzing in his ear, leading him to use a cotton swab to remove whatever is in there. It is then that he sees it. He finds a wasp. Terrified, he flushes it down the toilet, but more and more start coming out of his ear. Soon, a swarm of wasps lands on his back, forcing him to take off his shirt and throw it in the shower. But it doesn't end there. The wasps start coming out of parts of his body, overwhelming him and somehow killing him suddenly. The next scene shows Emily and Lilith at Douglas's funeral, during which Emily's suspicion regarding the child only grows. She goes to meet Mike and tries to convince him that something is wrong with Lilith and that the child must be responsible for what happened to Diego and Douglas. But Mike, of course, doesn't believe her. She then spends the rest of the day watching the interviews that the psychiatric hospital conducted with Lilith's parents, and discovers that Lilith's parents believe that over the years, Lilith has killed people through some sort of mind manipulation. Lilith's mother says that she and her husband used to have siblings, but when Lilith was born, they started dying one by one, and she blames the girl. The mother also says that Lilith could not get rid of them until she found someone new, and this makes Emily feel very scared. Emily then goes to visit Lilith's parents in the psychiatric hospital, where she sees the mother tied to the bed. But then, as it turns out, the scare was just an hallucination of Emily. She then has an audience with Lilith's father, who is convinced that Lilith is some kind of incarnation of the devil, and that she feeds on kind people like Emily. He tells Emily that Lilith is not his daughter, but an ancient destructive soul, like a demon. He also warns her that Lilith will hurt her using her worst fear against her. Terrified, Emily tries to withdraw custody of Lilith, but cannot at the moment. She then goes to visit Lilith while she is attending her group therapy session, and roughly drags her away when she sees her whispering to another child. Emily, worried that Lilith might hurt someone, tells her that she can no longer participate in group therapy, which enrages Lilith, and then something happens. However, it appears that this is just another hallucination. Emily is now fully convinced that Lilith is a demon. She tries to talk to Mike about it again, but he still does not believe her. That night, she installs several locks on the bedroom door, but it seems that Lilith is standing right outside like a creep. The next day, Emily is at work when she receives a call from a client. Unlike her usual gentle and patient self, Emily begins to shout and curse at the caller. Wayne notices this and tells her to go home. He receives a call and informs Emily that it is for her. When she answers, Emily hears Lilith's voice, but suddenly finds herself alone in the office, with everyone having already left. She runs home and ignores Lilith on her way to her room. Emily arms herself with a screwdriver and locks herself in. At some point during the night, Lilith begins to plead for Emily to let her in, saying she is scared. Not long after, the knocks stop, but Emily begins to hear noises coming from her closet. Emily runs for her life as the disfigured figure chases her. She finds a bus driver who lets her on the bus. The bus driver is confused to see that no one is chasing Emily. Emily then gets off the bus and gets into her car, where, surprisingly, Lilith is waiting for her. She begins to tell Emily that she has to do everything she says or she will kill her. The woman, who is terrified, has to give in for now. The next day, Emily is informed that they have found a foster family for Lilith. Reluctant to let Lilith hurt anyone else, Emily visits Lilith's father again to consult on what to do. The father tells her that she needs to make Lilith sleep, as it is the only time Lilith is vulnerable. Not only that, Emily must not be afraid, as Lilith takes advantage of people's fears. When Emily arrives home, she finds Lilith creepily watching a video of her parents being interviewed at the mental institution. Lilith then says that her parents stopped doing what she wanted them to do, and hints that now they must pay the price. Back at the psychiatric institution, Lilith's mother begins to imagine herself inside a large oven and starts to burn to death. Meanwhile, her father suddenly snaps and kills another patient before accidentally killing himself with a fork in the eye. After hearing about the deaths of Lilith's parents, Emily goes to visit Mike once more, and this time, the police friend believes her. He then shows her a recording of the call that Lilith made to Douglas moments before he died. In it, we can hear that Lilith's voice gradually changes to that of a man. Emily then tells Mike that she has no choice but to kill Lilith. Mike agrees to help her. However, that night, as they part ways to prepare, Mike is ambushed by a dog that suddenly appears inside his car. Mike shoots it with a shotgun and inadvertently ends up killing himself in the process. At home, Emily receives a call informing her that Mike is dead. Furious, she goes to Lilith and knocks over the TV. Emily begins to yell at her to get out of the house, but Lilith yells back in a man's voice. Now even more terrified, Emily locks herself inside her room, but Lilith begins to literally obliterate the door. Emily hides under the bed as Lilith calmly walks in. Her voice keeps changing between that of a little girl and that of a man. Then, she crawls under the bed and tells Emily that she just wants Emily to love her. With no other choice, Emily acts as if everything is okay. Before putting Lilith to sleep that night, Emily makes her a chamomile tea mixed with a bunch of sleeping pills. She then makes sure that Lilith is asleep before tying knots on the door of Lilith's room and pouring gasoline all around the house. Emily ends up setting the house on fire and feels relieved as she watches it burn from the outside. However, she realizes that her plan fails when she sees that Lilith somehow managed to get out alive. According to police directives, the two get into Emily's car and soon begin to follow police cars that take them to a temporary shelter. At this point, Emily is completely fed up with Lilith. Suddenly, she swerves the police car and starts speeding. Lilith uses her powers to give Emily a vision of her past, where she was a little girl inside a car, with her mother driving recklessly, just moments before they were in a car crash. Emily manages to overcome her fear and comes out of the vision, which terrifies Lilith. She swerves the car off the road and makes it fall onto a pier, sinking both of them. As the water starts to flood the car, Emily tries to drown Lilith to death, and we can see Lilith transform into a kind of creature. Emily then breaks the car's exit and tries to swim to the surface, but then Lilith tries to pull her down, but Emily manages to escape her grasp and reach the surface again. The film ends with a breathless Emily staring at the water, relieved. That is that instead of garment to be used that yard that is get into the marry them instead of the behaves that a yari that a bit in his diary them into behaves that a yari that a but